Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. This is Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. It's a question and answer broadcast. So that means if you have any questions, um, any topics, I'll take them from siblings, family, friends, anybody. If you want to ask them about siblings or family and friends, that's welcome. Also, if you have a question that a sibling or a family or friend might have for you, you can ask them to me as if you are that person and kind of compare my answer, at least hear what I would say if I were responding to that person. If you happen to be asking a question on behalf of a younger child, somebody under the age of 18, then please let me know the age, because I'm going to speak very differently to a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old than I am going to a 25 or a 45-year-old. Um, so it looks like we have a handful of questions that have come in. I don't have any pre-submitted ones. So let's take the questions that are coming in. The first question comes in that says, "What does a coming home plan look like?" Wow, that's a really large question. Um, so I'm going to speak to several different points. You might have heard me say that I'm not a huge fan of behavioral contracts. Mostly not because they don't offer any value, but because they don't accomplish the things that parents imagine that they accomplish. They don't do the work for you. Just because it's on paper and the child has agreed to it or signed it, I jokingly say, and it's true, that to this date in my history of working with families, never has a child violated a contract, been shown that contract and violation and the associated consequence, and responded with anything like, "You know what, you're right, you've pointed this out, I clearly signed this document, and so I deserve the consequence and welcome the consequence of the boundary." So it really doesn't accomplish, it doesn't do the work for you. I think the contract can be helpful for the parent to be clear. I think it can remove or minimize any self-doubt that you might have that you were unclear. But be clear about this. If you create a contract for a child and they sign it, especially if they sign it while they're in a therapeutic program, they're going to claim, most likely, and I think accurately, that they signed it under duress. In other words, you're saying to them, if you sign this, then you can come home. And so, of course, they're going to sign it. That kind of contract wouldn't hold up in any court in this country for sure, because there's too much leverage still involved in it. But you can write one. I think just showing it to them, talking about it with them, working through it with a therapist about what's involved in it, I think that can be an appropriate um, an appropriate tool if it helps you to be more clear, and so that when you cross some kind of threshold, that you don't have the self-doubt that we often have that says, maybe I wasn't clear, or maybe this expectation wasn't expressed clearly. But they're going to accuse you. They're going to find loopholes in it. They're going to find ways to excuse it. And so when I say it doesn't do the work for you, you're still going to have to set a boundary, which means that you're going to have to stand on in your space, in your truth, you what you feel and think and need as a parent. So if it adds you comfort, if it helps you have clarity, if it becomes a tool to kind of communicate with your child next steps as kind of a process, then I think it's helpful. But I almost think it would be more helpful in most all situations if you filed that yourself in your own file system and just had it as a reference point. Um, so that's kind of the contract answer. But I think coming home could involve therapy, 12-step programs. But I will tell you, and I've said this before, I think for teenagers, especially on the lower end, but maybe even 18, 19, I think mentors can be as effective and perhaps more effective than a therapist, and especially the younger that they are. If you're talking about 13, 14, 15-year-olds, the kind of the level of cognitive development doesn't lend itself well to talk therapy. What is suggested for younger children, and that's a generic kind of idea. There's no um, specific line or age that I'm describing, the younger the child is, the more experiential. For young children, we talk about play therapy because play is the language of children. But I don't think talk therapy is often the best for younger children. You can offer that as an option. Um, Definitely family therapy, I feel differently about, because family therapy, in essence, is to help you to work with them, to give an opportunity for a family therapist to kind of witness the family dynamic, the communication patterns, and help you with the process. But family therapy doesn't fix the kid, doesn't change the child's behavior. It's not like we family therapists, and I'm a family therapist. It's not like we have some kind of special tool set that is going to be particularly effectively manipulative with children. That's not really what it's for. It's for people who want help, who want awareness, who are kind of looking for tools, skills, and insight in the process. And so family therapy is going to help you. I think having them be a part of family therapy makes more sense as a requirement. Um, and so mostly you're talking about basic ground rules. The fewer the rules, the better. Again, I think when we get into the weeds, when we get into the specifics of our boundaries, we're trying to kind of legislate our way into no power struggles and no debates and cooperation. And it really doesn't work that way. So some kind of therapeutic support, family therapy, definitely. Um, Try to keep your home plan as general as possible. And most importantly, I mean, when I think of a home plan, by far the most important parts of it are what you're doing in your work. What meetings you're going to, what kind of therapy you're taking advantage of. Paying attention to your relapse prevention plan. What are going to be the resources and tools that you're going to make a practice in your life? That by far is the most important part of the home plan, because all of those things are going to set you up with success about how to deal with children in real time. I talk about this idea that I'll have a family coaching call with parents, and by the end of the call, everybody's really clear. The parents are really confident, comfortable, and clear about their decision and their track moving forward. And then you all know this, something happens in real time, and the equation is just 15% different than it was during the phone call, and it throws you off center. Right? You kind of lose your way, and you come back to the therapist and you said, yeah, but they said this, or it was like this. It wasn't exactly how we predicted. Therapy ideally helps you develop a mindset to help you develop the ability to make decisions in real time. It really is about the principles that you need to operate from in order to parent confidently, parent with some sense of peace and serenity. And of course, there are skills involved. So those are kind of my thoughts about it. There's no generic technique or solution, right? It involves disciplined, self-reflective mindset. It involves creativity that comes from awareness that you have for yourself. The research tells us that the closer you can get to the fewest amount of rules, the better. And here's where it makes sense. The most important part of a boundary is that it's a place that you get to stand, and you don't have to be right. You don't have to justify it. You just get to say, as a parent or a person, this is what I feel comfortable with. And so you're not arguing or defending your position. You're just saying, I'm not comfortable with this or with that. And so we want you to be able to be flexible and work in real time, and that takes work. And the barrier to all of us having effective boundaries is really comes from our own family of origin training and wounding and resources and messaging. So going back to that, going back into our history, understanding our own issues, what's at play with our own limitations around boundaries, that's the work. So it's a broad question, the question about home plan, but those are some general concepts involved. I do have broadcasts that talk about coming home after Evoke or after a secondary placement program. And maybe Malia, while we're sitting here, you can look that up and share that link or that episode number. Look it up at the podcast, that episode number with the parents here today. So I hope that helps. I know I can't really get into specific decisions, but those are some principles involved in developing a home plan. All right, next question. Somebody asked, during COVID, while my child is at an RTC, I'm struggling to deal with the issues they are facing with illness, quarantine, etc. And how would that be different if I just brought them home? It's a great question. And I think this really does lend itself to understanding what aftercare is about. Aftercare is a scaffolding that you and the child, it's for you too, that you and the child take advantage of or make use of to be able to kind of navigate your way through life. And so I know this will sound strange, and I really mean it metaphorically, but having a child at an RTC is no different than having them at home, in the sense that you're still working on you. They're still working on them. You're still working through anxiety, through boundaries, through communication. They're still working through whatever they're working through, whatever their mental health or mental illness looks like. But what you have is you have the structure of a residential treatment center to kind of support you through the process. And so if we can stop thinking of it, if this makes any sense, if we can stop thinking about it in terms of having a child at a wilderness program or a residential treatment center or a therapeutic boarding school is one thing, and having them home is a different animal altogether. And think about them more as just, I'm still parenting my child. There's still boundaries, there's still limits, and there's still structure and support. It's just that the residential treatment center is doing the kind of on the ground daily maintenance with the child and with you. And even that distance that happens in care, primary or secondary care, meaning that the buffer that the program provides for you is a part of the support. You're not riding the daily roller coaster with them. So it's support for you and for the child in living your life together. And the distance or the separateness of it is just part of that support. And ideally, as you get closer and closer to joining each other at home under the same roof, or having the program go away and the child goes, if they're a young adult, back to school, you're losing the scaffolding. You're losing the safety net, the support. Some of the people that were doing some of the heavy lifting on a day-to-day, moment by moment, assignment by assignment, chore by chore, boundary by boundary level, some of those people are going away as you get closer and closer to being home and being together and being without that support. So that's the way that I would kind of think of it. It's just support and scaffolding for you. And I'll say this last thing to make it clear. There is a lot of work that goes into the kind of things that residential treatment programs do for their children. You might not see it, but waking up, going to school, doing their chores, responding to boundaries, staying clean, and not getting into big trouble. All of the energy, all of the resources that go into maintaining that are a lot. And then basically when you're ready for your child to come home or come to a more traditional mainstream setting, if they're a young adult and they go to college, all of the resources are now going to be just you. You're going to be the residential treatment center, if you will. You're going to be the ones kind of working, navigating what it's like to be in a relationship with your child around all of those activities that I just mentioned without all the support. So that's kind of a way to think of it, to conceptualize it. Somebody asked the question, what are your best ideas on how to heal trauma for your kid? You might not, if you're new, you won't. This might sound strange to you. If you're not new, this won't be a surprise at all. But first and foremost, heal your trauma. And I know that might sound strange because you might not identify as having trauma, but we all have trauma, right? Trauma is anything less than ideal or optimal. So we all have traumas. We might not have big T traumas. I might not have significant loss or abuse or trauma, but we all have stuff. And so you work on healing your stuff. And I said this, I'm running an intensive right now. And I said this to the group today. I said, once you have this figured out, and for those of you that are listening, I'm pointing to the temples on both sides of my head. Once you have this stuff inside of your head figured out, you have the answers for the rest of life, right? The stuff inside of your head, that is the landscape. Once you know how to listen to your inner child, once you know how to listen to what's going on for you unconsciously or subconsciously, you then know how to listen to your child's unconscious, symptomatic, subconscious behavior. And you know how to respond to it. So the first task in helping somebody to heal is to heal yourself first. And I could quote, Greek tradition. I could quote biblical Torah tradition. I could make references to all of that. But that's the work. Know thyself first. Heal thyself. And then you know how to do boundaries. And then you know how to hold space for somebody. And then you have a sense of your limitations. And then you can own your stuff. And then when you make mistakes, you're clear about apologizing. Right? You kind of know where you stop and they start. I'm going to be talking about in an upcoming broadcast about guilt, blame, and accountability. It's an old, in fact, I think it was the second webinar I ever did. But I'm going to be rebooting that soon. And so you kind of know where the lines are drawn. And if you want to know the concepts involved and what helps somebody heal trauma, the last broadcast I did, just the one I did on Monday, really speaks to that, is providing the child a healthy container. A great book that's not mine is Parenting from the Inside Out. Daniel Siegel, a medical doctor from UCLA, the foremost writer and speaker in America on brain development and adolescents and children and young adults, and how it really relates to parenting tasks and parenting from the inside out. He talks about this, and he gives example after example, even as an emergency room doctor, about how his trauma got in the way of the work that he was doing with children in his emergency work during his rotation. So work on yourself. That sets the foundation for responding to anybody else. Have a practice of self-care, self-maintenance for growth. Like, in my opinion, that's what the intensive work is about, that we do, that I believe in, that I do myself. All of the stuff that I'm going to list at the end of the broadcast that I do every time about 12-step support groups, listening to the podcast, all of that teaches you how to first heal your trauma, but then be there for the other. And it's not intuitive, and we didn't have models for it. And previous generations, generally speaking, didn't talk about trauma. They were insensitive about it. They saw trauma maybe as an indication of somebody being a victim, somebody blaming, somebody not being accountable. They didn't know that you could have very, very clear boundaries and be sensitive and aware of other people's trauma, that you could hold people accountable in your lives and be compassionate and empathic toward their trauma at the same time. They just didn't have the education, the tools, the awareness that we have today in a broad way culturally. It wasn't present in the common culture. It's becoming more and more mainstream today. And Malia has shared the link about Home Contract Podcast. Next question. How does a parent see their kid in pain, cutting and suicidal, Be responsible for their well-being and be able to communicate that everything will be all right. This stems from your talk the other day, where I think you said that a good therapist holds the client's pain and be that everything is okay. Well, first of all, one of the ideas in the answer is I'm better at it with your children than I am with mine. And a therapist could be better at it with my children than I am. I think we make the mistake of believing as parents that because we love our children the most, that means that we're going to be the most helpful. I think we make the mistake of believing that because we love our children the most, that we know them the best, and the data doesn't show that, right? We are compromised by that love, by that connection. So therapists and outside folks help. But the more central answer to this question is this: if you, any of you, have a child that is behaving in dangerous ways, you need support. You need support groups, therapists, and resources. So my answer to the question specifically, how do you see a child struggling cutting and still project an idea that the child is okay, is you take care of yourself. And I'm turning to the side and pointing off in some abstract other place. You take care of yourself over there, so that when you interact with the child, you can be there for the child. Otherwise, if you don't know it's your job to take care of yourself, as they say in Al-Anon, my serenity is my responsibility. If you don't know that your serenity is your responsibility, you will ask the child to provide you with your serenity. And I can't be more emphatic about what I'm about to say. But to some large degree, that really is the genesis of mental health issues. The idea that it is a child's job to take care of a parent. That might sound strange. It might be obvious to you, but it might sound strange to you, or it might sound like I'm overstating it. But I'm going to say it again from my experience, and I'm clear about this. It's, to me, it's unarguable that much of our mental health issues stem from the idea, the process, the message, and most of it is unconscious, that it is the child's job to take care of the parents, make the parents happy, be responsible for the parents' anger, sadness, frustration, pride, happiness, joy. It's in our culture. It's in every culture that I visit, every visit that I talk and teach, that I talk at and teach to. It is, and if you want a reference for this, probably the greatest source material. I mean, I talk about it in both of my books at length, but the greatest source material is The Drama of the Gifted Child, or The Misery of the Good Child by J.D. Gill. The Drama of the Gifted Child is by Alice Miller. It's sold millions and millions of copies. Or The Misery of the Good Child by J.D. Gill has sold a few less than millions. It's written by my therapist, but it's a similar and a fantastic read. So, yeah. Next question: what does group therapy and wilderness therapy look like? Well, there's really two versions of group therapy and wilderness therapy. Sometimes it looks very traditional. I was just describing today to somebody this idea of kind of a meditation, or what people who practice hypnotherapy will talk about trance. You know, when traditionally, like when somebody tries to hypnotize somebody and they use a dangling pocket watch. You know, the pocket watch is to occupy the conscious mind, because it's the conscious mind is where the defense is. The conscious mind is the mind that warns off threats. So if you can get the conscious mind to focus on something, the person opens up more. That's what hypnosis is about. Or that's what meditation can be about, is resting the conscious mind. Sitting around a campfire or sitting around a circle, sitting around a campfire. We can't do fires right now, but most of the year we can. Everybody watches the fire dance, and it becomes kind of a meditative state, a trance. But that was an aside. So we have traditional group therapy sessions, letters, assignments, topics that the therapist or the staff assign. Those happen a couple of times a day, and they go for an hour, hour and a half, and they run them every day when the therapists aren't there, and the therapists run them every day that they're there. That's the traditional therapy. And then there's something we call standing groups, which is just a phrase that is a group on the fly in the middle of maybe cleaning up camp or in the middle of a hike or another activity, where we circle up for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and we process whatever's going on. Sometimes it's just somebody checking in. Sometimes it's about problem solving or communication between or amongst the students or clients. The staff, I was doing a staff training today with our staff, and somebody was describing that they had a difficult time this week because there was this culture emerging in the group where people were calling a standing group, students were calling a standing group that when they were triggered or upset maybe by a letter from home saying, I just want to share what I'm feeling and check in with what I'm feeling, but I don't need anybody to reflect it back. And I said, and the staff were saying, but it's our culture at Evoke that we reflect things back so that we can practice the skill and also make sure that we understand the other person. And I said, well, a couple of things. Number one, I'm thinking one of two things why they're asking for it not to be reflected back. The first thing is I think that they don't trust you. They don't trust that you reflecting it back, in quotes, is going to end there. I think they're probably suspicious and have some experience that having a process with you means that you're going to try to resolve it for them. Come to some kind of agreement or peaceful conclusion. And they just want to be mad. Or they're aware enough to know that they don't need anybody to reflect it. They just need to hear themselves say it. And that's an honest idea. I often just want to say it. And I don't need anything from my wife or from the other person, right? I just want to say it. It's that way with my therapist. And so, yes, reflective listening or active listening is a valuable skill, but you could just let them do it. So a standing group can be something as simple as that. So those are the two types of group. Topic focused, formal, sitting around in a circle once or twice a day, and then standing groups, which happen 5 to 10 times a day, every day. And then there are opportunities in those standing groups for staff to offer ideas, suggestions, insight, to facilitate communication or conflict, to help with problem-solving skills, emotional regulation skills, whatever it might be. Someone says, I'm dropping my child off at a residential treatment center tomorrow, and I'm very anxious about his transition. I won't be there because of COVID, which is very difficult for us. Any suggestions to help us, parents and kids, both deal with this the best? I don't have anything except for to say it makes sense. It's hard. I'm sure you're tired of hearing the phrase unprecedented times, but it is that, It's a painful, scary, confusing, unsure time. I'll tell you this. Maybe this might offer some comfort if that's what you're looking for, which I can only assume from your question. In reality, non-COVID times. If I could pick a process that would probably be more effective for families transitioning to a residential program after Evoke, I would choose this. I would have the family come out a week before the child leaves. I would transfer the child to the program, and I would have the parents come after the child is settled in a month or two. I was in woodshop in middle school in Irvine, California. And I don't remember a lot from middle school, but I remember this one demonstration from my woodshop teacher. You know, in middle school, I was only in woodshop. I was only good enough to make a breadboard. That's all I could make. I had no more talent than that. You know, you glue a bunch of different kinds of woods together. You glue them correctly. You cut them and then you level them off, sand them, and so forth. That was my skill level in woodshop. And I remember at the beginning of one of the semesters, the teacher showed a breadboard that he had glued together the week before, whenever. And he took it and he broke it over his knee along the long lines of the glue where all of the pieces of wood were joined together. And then he showed us the break. And he said, if it breaks unevenly or in the middle of the wood, you did a good job. If it breaks right along the seam of where one piece of wood joined another, where the glue was, you didn't do a good job. He said, because the place where the wood is joined together, if it's done poorly, is the weakest part of the thing, of the breadboard. And I've remembered that. I probably remember 2 or 3 things from middle school, but that's one thing I remember, that demonstration, object lesson. And transitioning to the next step is kind of like where you're joining 2 things together. It's the most vulnerable time, the most difficult and challenging time. So if I were to offer comfort, the best thing would be to have the visits not be during that time. Now, during COVID, you might not get the visit before or after anyway. But I just want to tell you all that the specific visit in between, taking the child to the next program, it's not all you imagine it to be. It's usually a difficult, painful, emotional time. I remember when I was dropping my oldest off. He's 27 now. He was 14 at the time. When I was taking him from Wilderness and dropping him off at a therapeutic boarding school. I had been prepared for it. I'd been a wilderness therapist for over 10 years at the time. So I had plenty of experience coaching and teaching and talking about this with families. And I cried so hard when we were getting close to saying our goodbyes that my son actually comforted me and said, "I'll be okay, Dad." Not proud of that, but it's true. That's how hard it was. It's the most vulnerable and difficult time. And it's difficult for the child too. Client after client over the years has told me that the more contact they have with people at home, the longer the transition is, the more difficult that it can be. Even though on the front end, people want all of those things because they think it's going to be very comforting, reassuring, and rewarding, and it's not. COVID stinks. You know, COVID is the worst. It's a horrible set of circumstances and conditions. It's not good for my 12-year-old who's in school. It's not good for my 18-year-old who just started his first year of college. It's not good for my mental health. So mostly I just want to say I'm sorry, and it's hard, and I get it. Someone asked the question, what is the most important thing I can be doing while my child is away at treatment? Well, I'll click on this slide. Attend 6 of these 12-step support groups. Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Adult Children, Refuge Recovery, any combination of 6, whatever. Try a few different ones. They're all available online these days. Attend parent support groups, listen to the podcast, the webinars, read the books that are suggested. Do the work. Get the work started now. Don't wait until you get to the end to do the work. If you have time and resources, attend an intensive. We're doing them online. They're shorter than in person. They're more affordable because you don't have all the costs associated with travel. If you can come to the one of them in person, do that one. Go to emailintensives@evoketherapy.com or go to our website and click on the top tab of intensives where you can learn about them. It's really just doing your work, getting the wheels spinning so that when whenever this ends, this process of therapy away from home for the child ends, you've got the wheels spinning already. You're not starting from scratch. So do your work. I'm doing a Finding You Too this week. I did the first session today. And what I love about Finding You Too is that people know what their work is and there's no shame in it. In fact, they've gotten over this shame enough that they realize that this is a lifelong project. Right? This is what we all need to do, and it's a privilege to be able to do our work, and it changes our entire life, not just our parenting skill set and awareness, but it changes everything. So my answer is get your work going, listen to the podcast, do the intensives if you can, read the books from the library, go to 6 12-step support groups before your child leaves. That's what you can be doing. What kind of training does field staff have? Well, they have on-the-job training. We have some very basic preliminary qualifications. They don't have to have college degrees. They don't have to have advanced training in psychology. It's really like it used to be, centuries ago, where you learned a skill by watching somebody more expert doing it. And so we have levels in our field staff. We have interns, level 1, level 2, and then seniors. And then there's a couple of other levels for mentoring field guides. But they're kind of learning. Each group has one senior, and they're kind of in charge of the treatment team decisions while the therapist isn't there. And they're training the field staff and learning as they go. Then we have staff supervision. We have in-service every week. And with each level, there are books and proficiencies, both physically that they have to accomplish, like certain things around the hard skills, like busting a bow drill fire. Then they also have to demonstrate proficiencies around basic skill building. So Evoke itself is a training facility. Where was I? I was somewhere recently where it might have been a staff training I did last week, where somebody was asking about degrees, and one of the field staff said that being a field staff was one of the greatest training. In fact, most of our field staff say when they go to graduate school, it feels beneath them and boring because they've been living it and practicing it in real time. My daughter, Emma Reedy, which some of you know, she's getting an advanced degree. She's getting her PhD, but she's been assisting me with intensives for 5 years. Emma, right now, is more experienced than therapists who have PhDs in the work we do at intensives. And she's still in her PhD program, but she's actually training our licensed degreed therapists on how to run psychodramas and intensives out in the program. So on-the-job training. Evoke is a training program. Someone asked the question, any ideas about how to deal with the depression and anxiety I'm feeling in general on top of what's going on in our family? I've been dealing with a bit of depression myself in the last couple of months, actually. I wish that weren't the case for me, but I have been. I'm grateful because I have a therapeutic practice in terms of being a client that's regular, that's ongoing. So I'm doing that. Self-care, finding ways to set boundary around self-care to I've learned with my own self-care. I talked about this with our staff at in-service this week, that to avoid burnout and to maintain a certain level of mental health, we have to learn to be okay with disappointing people and letting other people down. That's what I've had to do recently, is I've had to let people down. I've had to take breaks, say no to things. I delegated some tasks this week to some of my staff that were my job because I needed help and support. I think mostly you've got to be sometimes during the week, you've got to be in a room where you get to feel and talk about your feelings, and it's okay. And it's not solved, and it's understood, and compassion is offered. And the person can reflect back that sense, like I talked about on Monday night, that sense that it's okay, that it's going to be okay. When I talk to my therapist, that's what she does. She listens. She welcomes what I have to say. She empathizes. She offers compassion. Obviously, she offers insight at times, and some tools on occasion to kind of cope with it. The same tools that I'm sharing with you right now. But most importantly, it's just the act of being held. And so you've got to be in places, in spaces where people don't give you advice or solutions, right? Where they don't try to talk you out of it or rationalize it all. That's really important. Someone asked the question, how do you get a child a mentor? Ask your educational consultant or your Evoke therapist. There are programs out there that have developed over the years since my career began, where they have mentors specifically designed for people that have been through programs like ours and subsequent placements. So they're out there. There are programs where they're provided for you. Some are local in your community. Some are national. They travel. Ideally, if they can do it in person, they can go surfing with your kid or skiing with your kid or help your kid go to the DMV, right? Do that kind of thing. Whatever the basic tasks are, that's ideal. But there are mentoring programs. Ask your Evoke therapist or your educational consultant, and they can make referrals for mentors that do this kind of work with this population. Someone says, my question about marijuana. I don't remember that question. Did I miss a question about marijuana? My question about marijuana meant, okay. It's right above it. I'm curious as to your opinions about marijuana. My son, almost 18, currently in wilderness after an RTC, has stated that he plans to keep smoking marijuana to help him chill out. I go back and forth on marijuana relative to all other horrors out there, and would personally prefer he doesn't use it at all. My question about marijuana meant to say that it is his opinion on where marijuana fits into his home plan, the reality versus what we might desire of zero tolerance as parents. I want to answer this question the same way I would answer the question about any kind of medication. In this case, he's self-prescribing it, but when doctors look at medication, the first thing they consider is the cost-benefit analysis with side effects. That's the first thing they look at. And so we look at the side effects of marijuana, which are, it does provide for people with ADHD or anxiety at times, a medication-like effect, right? It helps them to medicate it. It also lowers motivation, right? It also reduces, for some people, the ability to concentrate. It also can the tolerance can build up to it. So you look at that and you start to question, you're also talking about a developing brain. But here's the bottom line. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what the next doctor says. I've told the story before that a father walked up to me after a parent meeting one time somewhere and said, do you have any literature on journal articles on the effects of marijuana? And I said, I'm sure I could find some. Why do you ask? And he said, well, my young adult son is sitting in the basement smoking pot all day. And I said, well, why don't you tell him you're not okay with that? And he said to me, is that enough? And I said, of course, that's all you have. And I heard in this father's question, is that enough? I heard something about his own childhood, which was it wasn't enough for him to just feel what he felt. You know, you get to decide what you're comfortable with. You get to decide what you're going to tolerate. I can offer you conceptualizations. You can read journal articles about the positive and negative effects of marijuana. I said to this father, if I give you a journal article, your son is just going to find another one that shows that marijuana should be used for anxiety or depression. And then where are you at? You're quoting the University of California in Los Angeles, and he's quoting the University of Wisconsin. So who's right? So you get to have your boundaries. And if he says, I want to do that, then you get to decide if you're willing to support that. And if he's a young adult, then you get to say, go for it. But I'm not paying for it. Or if motivation wanes, if you can't go to school, if you can't get a job, you could start paying attention to kind of the outcomes of the side effects. You can make any of the decisions you want to around this. But like I say in my newest book, you don't get to be right anymore. You just get to be you, and being you is so much better than being right. So the question that you're asking is kind of what's the right boundary? What's the right idea? And there's no right or wrong idea in this. There's just your boundary. Everybody on this broadcast live can think of examples of things that have no right or wrong to them, but that you get to determine whether or not you're comfortable with it. Everybody can think of an example in their life right now with a friend or a spouse. You get to decide. And I would encourage you not to have a debate about who's right or who's wrong, and not to recruit experts. I mean, you can talk about and educate yourself about the side effects and brain development. There's plenty of research out there to suggest that certain drugs could have a negative effect on early brain development, for sure. Right? Releasing dopamine into the system versus taking a serotonin uptake inhibitor. There's definitely going to be different pros and cons, cost benefits in those two approaches to medicating symptoms. But at the end of the day, you just get to have your boundary, and it's whatever you feel comfortable with. It's a lot like, I was talking to a client not too long ago, and we were talking about sexual addiction, and we were talking about masturbation. And my conversation was like, you get to decide what you're comfortable with. You get to decide. For some people, masturbation wouldn't be an issue. For other people, it could be a trigger into compulsive behaviors. For some people, drinking a glass of alcohol, not a problem. For other people, it's a trigger or a gateway into addiction. Same with betting on a football game. Same with marijuana. Taking a Xanax. Right? It's when we think about addictions, it's not, the problem isn't in the substance or the activity. The issue is in your relationship to the substance or the activity. And it is personal. And technically speaking, people who treat and talk about and teach about addiction, they would tell you whether or not your son is addicted to something or not is none of your business. You just get to observe the symptoms and decide what you're willing to support or not support. But determining addiction or not is not your responsibility. When you go to Al-Anon or CODA, they don't teach you how to figure out if your spouse is an alcoholic or not. They get to they teach you how to be clear about boundaries. Is your spouse being aggressive, disrespectful, violent, whatever it is, whatever the side effect of their self-medicating behavior is. Someone asked the question, our 15-year-old is coming home for his first home visit for 4 days tomorrow. Wow. From his residential treatment center after leaving Evoke in July. In my own therapy this week, we talked about expectations for the weekend, and my goal is to prioritize how we will do things over what we will do. Great. Still, there are so many things our child wants to do after not being home since April. Plus, his birthday is next week, so I'm feeling a lot of pressure for his visit to go well and meet his expectations. Any advice? Great question. I'll do one more question after this, Malia. Listen to the podcast on boundaries. That's my advice. We've got to figure out how to respond to the pressure that our children or anybody puts on us. We've got to figure out what that triggers in us. Does it trigger guilt, or does it trigger a lack of self-confidence? What comes up for us in this process? So, what I would say is work on. I remember I had a parent say to me years ago. A parent said to me years ago, called me. It's a long story, but called me and said, we just did a bunch of school visits while their child was still at a therapeutic school. And they did some college visits. And they told me the story, and they said, our son said these things, but that's not my point, she said. This mother said, it's not my point what my son did. I want to tell you how I reacted to it. I reacted to it differently than I used to. And I thought to myself, that's it. That's the magic. That's the focus. Your son's going to come home and do what he does. He's going to ask for things. He's going to push boundaries. He's going to ask you to go to concerts or visit friends, whatever. Not concerts. We're not having concerts today. But he's going to ask you to see people. And he's going to tell you things like, I deserve it and I've been good. And when am I going to be free? And you get to decide where your boundary is. And maybe most importantly, don't measure it as pass or fail. Maybe you'll decide, okay, you can see a friend. And maybe that will end up in what some people might consider a disaster. But instead of thinking like a disaster, you're going to say, well, that's interesting where you're at. You're going to learn from that. It's going to be feedback to you. It's going to be kind of a measuring stick. In sports, often early in the season, a team can suffer a big loss. And an experienced coach will inevitably say during the press conference, it showed us where we were at, showed us where our weaknesses are at. We're going to go look at the film of the game, right? And we're going to learn from it. I thought our defense was better. I thought our offense was going to click. And here in this game, we completely blew it. We had several turnovers or unforced errors or whatever it is. So try to think about it in non-black and white terms, in non-pass or fail terms. Try to think of it as an experiment. And what are you going to learn from it? And even if it goes poorly, that's information. But most importantly, put the emphasis of your attention and focus on how you're dealing with him and his pressure and his pushback. What kind of anxiety is coming up for you? How are you going to manage that anxiety? Are you going to ask him to manage it? Are you going to tell him it's his fault because he's pushing? Or are you going to go to your Al-Anon sponsor or your therapist at home and talk about it there? And obviously, you know my preference. One is fundamentally more beneficial for both of you. Last question. I've been wondering if my son, having gone through a serious life-threatening illness in infancy, could have contributed to his mental health problems in his preteen, teen, and now in young adulthood. Is there any type of therapist who would explore this? Any therapist that works in trauma, specifically the kinds of trauma like brain spotting or EMDR, where they're using our knowledge about brain functioning to access unconscious pre-verbal trauma, would be helpful for that. So brain spotting, EMDR come to mind first and foremost. I prefer brain spotting over EMDR. Brain spotting grew out of EMDR, but both could be helpful. So that's the answer to the question, the simple answer to the question. But it's like somebody was asking me today, seek that out, find it. That's a great tool, great resource. And then remember that it's important, valuable to focus on what's within your control. Somebody asked me today about adoption, a child's adoption. And I said, yeah, we're going to explore that. We're going to ask questions. There are going to be assignments around that. We're definitely going to look underneath that rock, if you will. But on these phone calls, we're going to focus on what's within your control. And even how for you to talk about his being put up for adoption. We're gonna focus on that. That's something inside of your control. So, if we had the instruments, I believe this, and the science is catching up. It's not quite Star Trek level science, but it's catching up. At some point in time, the science is going to be so advanced that we're going to be able to look at brain imaging and know what's going on with somebody. Be able to kind of explain their symptomatic behavior by what we see in the brain. And we might even have the physical cures or medical cures to treat it. Maybe. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is really the best thing that understanding brain science and past traumas like the one you're describing, the idea of a disease, the disease of addiction, the best thing that they do for us is they offer us empathy for somebody who's struggling. Instead of thinking it's just willful disobedience. And really what psychotherapy, what psychology offers us, one of the great gifts that it offers us, one of the great gifts it has offered me in my life is when I look at the world through psychology, I see people struggling, making hurtful decisions about or towards other people. I see them through the compassionate lens that psychology offers. So all of these frameworks, including the trauma framework that you're describing, really just offer us a compassionate, non-judgmental lens. And that can be very helpful in how we respond. All right. Thanks for all of your questions. Upcoming, for those of you that are listening that don't have a child at Evoke, we have a wilderness therapy program. So go to our webpage if you're curious. It's an experiential outdoor program using the most up-to-date therapeutic models in the context of small group communal living in nature. So go check us out at evoketherapy.com or call toll-free 866-411-6600. All of our intensives are, we have online and we have in-person intensives now with testing and special measures in place. So go to our website or email intensives@evoketherapy.com for the schedule, upcoming events. We have Pursuits trips, which can be, Pursuits is a separate program from our wilderness program. So you can use it for an in-between time. It's a completely separate program, but that is an option. But Pursuits trips are adventure activities. It can even be in cabins. You can go snowshoeing or skiing or surfing or kayaking or horseback riding. They're customized, anywhere from 3 to 30-day programming. We have parent support groups for parents, alumni parents of wilderness, and alumni participants of our intensives program. So our next wilderness alumni meeting is Thursday, October 1st at 6:30 p.m. And for intensives is October 13th. Go to our website or email malia@evoketherapy.com for more information to schedule to RSVP. We ask all parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Adult Children, refugerecovery.org, and NAMI.org are also other great resources, free resources in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on your podcast app, your favorite podcast platform. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us at Evoke Therapy or at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. You can find the Evoke Family Foundation at evokefamilyfoundation.org or on Facebook, and then our blog has new content each week. Both of my books are available on Amazon. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and also The Audacity to Be You is available with a new audiobook coming out any day now. I've been saying that for about a month. All right. Next broadcast will be Tuesday, September 29th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, where I'll be talking about parental work. Like I said earlier, guilt, blame, and accountability. So Tuesday, September 29th, 6 p.m., different time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, guilt, blame, and accountability. Look forward to that. One of the very first ones I did, one of the chapters out of my book, The Journey of the Rogue Parent. I hope this is a helpful point of contact for you. Thank you for, and on behalf of your child and those that love you, for the work that you're willing to do to look at yourself. Take care, folks, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.